Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Marshall Ventley found a strange fence slicing through his land, he thought it was a mistake. He was wrong. What followed was a jaw-dropping battle of lies, power, and paper, where one man stood alone against an HOA determined to steal what wasn't theirs. This is war over water. The morning I saw the sign was the morning the world stopped making sense. I'd walked that path 1,000 times, boots heavy with dew, coffee steaming in hand, the stillness of my land breathing through the pine needles and damp soil. 40 acres of quiet solitude and the kind of peace that only comes with owning every blade of grass beneath your feet. I knew every contour of that slope, every rustle in the brush, and yet there it was. A chain-link fence gleaming like a cold insult in the sunlight, bolted right into the southern boundary of my land, and stapled to it, flapping like some bureaucratic prayer flag in the breeze, a sign that read, Hickory Crest HOA property, access restricted to residents only. I just stood there, blinking, like maybe the wind would blow and the fence would vanish, or maybe I'd blink again and find it was all a prank. But no, that thing was bolted into my soil. Deep, like it had come here to stay. I followed the fence line with my eyes. It curved just enough to block off the entire southern lip of my pond. Not a stream, not a ditch. My pond. I dredged it myself with a rented excavator 15 years ago, reinforced the bank with limestone, and installed the solar pump that kept the cattails from swallowing it whole. 1.6 acres of still water, the heart of my land. And now it had a leash. I turned back. Walked the line all the way around, counting the steps like I was back in a surveying class. Then I went to the barn, grabbed my old Garmin unit, and ran a full GPS trace against my property plat. It wasn't even close. That fence was a good 30 feet inside my legal line, right into my pasture, right into my damn pond. I took photos from every angle. Then I cracked open the lockbox where I kept the deed, plat, and the hydrology permit from when I registered the water retention basin. Every line was where it should be. Every contour matched. That pond was on my land. End of story. Only it wasn't. The next morning, a group of strangers was gathered near the water line. 6, maybe 7 people, folding chairs. One guy had a cooler. 2 women were sunning, like it was a community pool. And one jackass was casting a fishing rod with all the grace of a raccoon on cocaine. I walked down slowly, hands visible, voice calm. Morning, I said, nodding toward the water. You folks realize this is private property. One woman barely glanced up from her folding chair. Karen said it's community access now. Karen who? The HOA president, said another. She put up the fence. Said this pond used to be public before the last owner took it over. I nearly choked. That's not just incorrect. It's a goddamn fantasy. I've owned this land 15 years. That pond was dug by my own hands. A guy with a straw hat and a base-shaped belt buckle shrugged. That's not what the letter said. What letter? HOA Bulletin. Said something about reclaimed environmental access. Didn't really read it. I took a long breath. You need to leave. Now. They grumbled but eventually packed up, slow, resentful like I'd spoiled their holiday. That night, I drove down to the entrance of Hickory Crest and took a look. Big stone sign, faux rustic lamps. A little bulletin board in a glass case. Sure enough, there it was. A typed letter from Karen Lawrence, HOA president, stating that, after community review, the southern pond along Hickory Border Trail is now designated as a shared resource for the health and enjoyment of residents. She cited nothing. No parcel numbers, no maps, just a lot of talk about stewardship and unity and reclaiming natural harmony. Next morning, she showed up at my gate like she owned the road in. White SUV, mirrored sunglasses, clipboard in hand. Mr. Ventley, she chirped. We need to talk about your attitude toward shared resources. My attitude, she gestured behind her. You've been rather aggressive with residents exercising their community rights. We're very tolerant here, but Hickory Crest will not be intimidated. I folded my arms. Karen, I don't live in Hickory Crest. I'm not a member. That pond's on my land. Always has been. She smiled like a snake in pearls. Water is a public good. Georgia Code 4481 establishes the public's interest in navigable water. I blinked. That pond's not navigable unless you're a frog. And even if it were, that code doesn't grant recreational use rights over private land." "Well," she sniffed, "we'll see what the county says. If you continue interfering with shared access, we may be forced to escalate." She left a stack of community rights pamphlets in my mailbox. I burned them that evening in a metal barrel. That night, I couldn't sleep. The quiet felt different, off, like something had been stolen. Not just the pond, not just the land, but the logic that held things together. I'd dealt with broken pumps, raccoons in the attic, even a black bear in my tool shed once. But nothing in those years of farming prepared me for a war with people who could lie with such polished teeth. I sat at the edge of the pond under the stars, listening to the water lap against the limestone. My water, my land, mine. I wasn't going to give it up without a fight. 3 days passed before the next hit landed, and this one came with paper and authority, or at least the theater of it. I was in the middle of tightening a valve on my irrigation manifold when a white sedan pulled up the drive like it had every right in the world. Out stepped a man in khakis, polos, and that little laminated badge on a lanyard that screamed, "I have no real power, but I want you to think I do." He didn't introduce himself, just walked past my pasture fence with a clipboard like he was, cataloging a crime scene. "Can I help you?" I called, straightening up. "Yes, sir," he replied, already writing something. "Routine inspection related to a neighborhood environmental complaint." "From who?" "Hickory Crest HOA. There have been reports of improper water management, shoreline degradation, and unlicensed equipment installed on a community access pond." I let that one sit for a second, like a rattlesnake coiling in the grass. "That's not a community pond," I said slowly. "That's my pond, my land, my equipment, and you're trespassing." He looked up like I'd just farted in church. "Sir, I've been asked to document conditions on behalf of the HOA's Environmental Review Committee. I'm with Terra Harmony Consulting." "Who hired you?" "The HOA board," he said, lifting a camera and snapping a photo of my pump housing. I stepped forward. "You've got exactly 10 seconds to leave this property, or I'm calling the sheriff." He paused, considering me. I guess he didn't like the look on my face because he turned and walked briskly back to his car. But not before leaving a business card on my fence post and saying, "I'll be submitting my report to the board. Expect formal recommendations." That afternoon, I found an envelope taped to my gate. HOA letterhead, faux legal formatting, and the words "Notice of Non-Compliance" in big bold letters. It listed 3 violations: unauthorized water control infrastructure, refusal to cooperate with environmental inspection, and obstructing community stewardship efforts. Fines totaling $300 were effective immediately. I laughed. So hard I nearly pulled something. But that was the moment I realized this wasn't just some Karen with too much time on her hands. This was a playbook, a script. I was being papered to death. Death by document, signature, letterhead. And the worst part? Most folks would have folded. Paid the fine just to be left alone. I wasn't most folks. I drove straight to the county records office and requested full plats of my land, the Hickory Crest subdivision, and every relevant easement, floodplain, and water permit issued in the last 20 years. I knew what I'd find, but I wanted it in ink. Official ink. I left with a folder thicker than a Bible and drove home without turning on the radio. My mind was already building walls. I spent the next day installing 3 motion-activated trail cameras near the fence line, tucked into tree trunks buried in bird boxes, one even camouflaged under the eaves of my old boathouse. Anything bigger than a squirrel would get caught in 4K. 2 days later, one of the cameras caught a man, late 30s, ball cap backwards, cargo shorts, hopping the fence from the HOA side, wandering around my shoreline with a phone. He walked the bank, took a leak against my cottonwood, and tried to jimmy the lock on my pump control box. I downloaded the footage, time-stamped, and burned it to a thumb drive labeled Exhibit A. But it got worse. On Saturday, I was out near the boat dock, checking on algae bloom levels, when I noticed a woman with a DSLR camera across the pond, perched behind the new fence, taking photos through the slats like some feral National Geographic intern. I waved. She snapped one more shot and bolted. That night, just past 8, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The message was 20 seconds long, and it sounded like it had been dictated by a Stepford wife in full meltdown. It was Karen. "Mr. Bentley, I am calling to officially inform you that continued interference with HOA-sanctioned access and monitoring of the shared water resource will result in escalation. We have retained counsel, and I will be forced to involve the county if this continues. You've been warned. I saved the voicemail. Labeled it Threat 1. The next morning, I woke up to find a second sign added to the fence. All trespassers will be prosecuted by the Hickory Crest Environmental Committee. It was bolted in with fresh screws, half an inch into my oak. That's when I realized I'd have to fight this with more than trail cams and sarcasm. These people were building a paper war, and it was time I answered in kind. I called an old colleague from my engineering days, a cadastral surveyor named Doyle Reeves, who knew how to draw lines in a way that held up in court. I told him the situation. He laughed once and said, "I'll bring the tripod." "You bring the coffee." He was coming Monday. In the meantime, I hung a sign of my own. Private property. No trespassing. Violators will be photographed, reported, and persecuted in that order. The last word was intentional. Let them stew. It happened just after dawn on a Wednesday, one of those damp Appalachian mornings where everything smells like moss and old pine. I had taken the skiff out to inspect the aeration intake. The pump was giving off a faint wheeze, and algae was starting to coat the intake screen, which meant it was time to clean it out before things got slimy. I drifted about halfway across the pond when I heard tires crunch on gravel behind the tree line. I figured it was a delivery truck, or maybe Doyle, the surveyor, arriving early. Then I heard shouting, "Drop the pole! Hands where I can see them!" I turned around slowly, confused, the aluminum pole still in my grip. On the shore stood two deputies in sheriff's uniforms. One had a hand hovering over his holster, the other held a radio to his mouth. And behind them, standing proudly just outside the HOA fence line, arms crossed and eyes blazing with triumph, was Karen. "Marshal Bentley," the older deputy called out. "We got a call about a trespasser with possible intent to damage property. You match the description." "I live here," I said evenly, lifting my pole out of the water and setting it inside the boat. "This is my pond, my land. You've got the wrong idea." The younger deputy was already motioning for me to return to shore. I paddled in silence, my heart pounding not from fear, but from the absurdity of it all. Karen was grinning like she'd just summoned a storm. When I stepped onto dry land, the older deputy asked for ID. I handed over my license and pointed toward the house, now half visible behind a ridge of oaks. "I own the land you're standing on, 40 acres. That pond's been mine since 2010. I have deeds, plats, permits, you name it." Karen stepped in, clutching a file folder. "That pond is under dispute. Our HOA has issued a community claim, and we have documentation showing shared access rights. This man was seen behaving erratically in a boat with tools. We feared sabotage." The deputy raised an eyebrow at the word sabotage. I glanced down at my waterproof toolbox. Inside, a PVC scraper, a rag, a socket wrench, and 2 zip ties. Real weapons of mass destruction. "Mind if we take a look at your tools?" the deputy asked. "Knock yourself out," I said. "Just don't drown in the paperwork afterward." They rummaged through it, finding nothing but the normal detritus of water maintenance. Meanwhile, Karen kept talking, her voice rising with each sentence. "He's been aggressive with residents. There was an altercation just last week. We've issued formal notices. He's obstructed community surveys, defaced our signage. Your signage is on my trees," I cut in. "You bolted a steel warning plate into my oak. That's vandalism. And I've got the photos to prove it." The older deputy stepped back and sighed. "All right, everybody cool down. Mr. Bentley, we'll need to escort you to the station for a formal statement, just to clear things up." Karen looked positively radiant. I stared at her for a full 5 seconds without blinking. Then I turned to the deputy. "I'm not resisting. But before we go, I want you to do one thing. Step exactly 20 feet west from that fence post and tell me what it says on the metal tag at the base of that survey pin." The younger cop obliged, muttering numbers as he read the tag. "County parcel 30872. Owner Bentley M." The older one nodded grimly. "Yeah, we'll sort this at the station." They didn't cuff me, but I sat in the back of the cruiser, silent, while Karen stood on the gravel shoulder and watched us leave like she was queen of the lake, and I was the swamp monster being escorted to exile. At the station, things moved quickly. Once I handed over the deed, GPS-stamped survey maps, and copies of my hydrology permit, the tone shifted. One officer offered me coffee. Another apologized. They let me go after an hour. When I got home, I found the HOA Facebook group had already exploded. Someone, guess who, had posted an emergency alert about a dangerous male trespasser apprehended during suspicious activity on community waters. The post had over 70 comments, half of them demanding increased security, the other half arguing about whether or not I was actually dangerous or just a grump. I didn't answer. I had work to do. The next day, I installed another round of cameras, infrared this time with motion tracking, one inside a rock pile near the pump housing, another on the porch angled toward the HOA fence. I upgraded the trail cams to send footage straight to my phone. Then I called Doyle. He was already halfway through the topographic overlay. "Marshall," he said, "I hate to break it to you, but that HOA fence, they overshot their southern boundary by a good 32 feet. "Into my land," I said. He chuckled. "More like through it. That fence is standing where your pump easement runs. They're not just on your land. They're blocking your infrastructure." That changed things. I asked him to draw up an affidavit, include the GPS data, time-stamped drone photos, and parcel overlays. He said it would take a few days to finalize. "Make it airtight," I said. "The kind of thing that survives both fire and stupid." That night, I sat on my porch watching moonlight glitter on the water. I had just started to relax when I saw headlights creeping down the ridge trail behind the HOA fence, a golf cart modified with headlights. In the back, someone stood up with a flashlight and started scanning my side of the pond. I didn't move. I just let the camera do its job. Motion detected, footage saved, timestamp logged. They wanted a fight. They were about to get a goddamn war. Doyle showed up the following Monday in his rusted-out pickup, the kind that rattled like a toolbox every time it hit a bump. He brought his gear, surveying tripod, GPS rover, a laptop with software that cost more than my truck, and a box of maple donuts like it was just another pleasant morning on the farm. We spent the better part of the day walking the perimeter of my pond, measuring, logging, and flagging every inch of disputed land. When we finished, he set up the drone and did 2 full passes over the property with a geo-referenced overlay. "This isn't close," Doyle said, squinting at his screen. "They didn't just drift over the line, Marshall. They charged right through it like drunk conquistadors. 32 feet onto your land. Their fence cuts across your registered pump easement and clips about 120 feet of shoreline." "Can you say that louder?" I asked. "I want the Pines to hear it." He chuckled. "You'll have it in writing. County-grade documentation, GPS logged, time-stamped, and notarized." I took a long breath. That was the break I'd needed. I called my attorney, Rachel Burns, a no-nonsense woman with a voice like cold steel, and told her the documents were coming. She was already drafting a preliminary injunction request and a cease and desist letter. "I assume they won't take it seriously," she said. "So let's make it bite." But the real showstopper came 2 days later when one of my trail cams pinged me during lunch. The video clip showed a man, mid-40s, HOA badge on a lanyard, climbing over the fence on the HOA side, cutting through the woods, and attempting to open the old pump shed near the water. He wasn't carrying tools. He was carrying a cordless drill. I drove down immediately. By the time I got there, he was gone, but the lock had fresh gouges, and one of the hinges was half stripped. He'd tried to take it off. I called the sheriff's office. This time, I wasn't polite. The deputy who arrived was the same older guy from the boat incident. He seemed tired of Karen, tired of this HOA, tired of the whole goddamn circus. "You got video?" he asked. I handed him the tablet. He watched in silence. "Looks like criminal trespass and attempted vandalism," he muttered. "That's a Class B misdemeanor, but with prior incidents. It's stacking up." I gave him the file from Doyle, the new survey report, and pointed out that the fence itself was trespassing, not just the people climbing it. "We'll escalate," he said. "But you might want to get this in front of a judge sooner rather than later." I did one better. That night, I sent the full evidence package, video, GPS maps, plat overlays, fence encroachment reports, and the footage of HOA members entering my land, to Rachel. By morning, she had filed a formal notice of lawsuit to the HOA and its board, naming Karen Lawrence as a principal actor in illegal encroachment, defamation, criminal trespass, and attempted seizure of private infrastructure. The HOA's legal rep, some smooth-talking guy named Carter Whitley, responded by email with a ridiculous counterclaim. They alleged that the pond was historically used by the community, that communal access had been tacitly permitted, and that attempts to assert exclusive ownership were in violation of implied easement principles. They included low-resolution scans of an old map dated 2006, where the parcel lines were hand-drawn and suspiciously smudged. They even tried to cite a verbal agreement with the previous owner, except, of course, there was no previous owner before me. That same day, the county clerk called to let me know someone had attempted to file an environmental usage adjustment on my parcel, citing HOA community usage rights. It had been rejected, but the fact that it had even been attempted meant someone had submitted forged paperwork. I was boiling. Rachel filed a formal complaint with the registrar's office, citing forgery and abuse of process. She also submitted an emergency motion to have the fence removed pending litigation, noting that it was obstructing legal agricultural and hydrological operations. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. But the HOA wasn't done. That weekend, I found my mailbox smashed in. At first, I thought it was random vandalism, until I noticed a copy of the same HOA bulletin shoved into the dirt nearby, crumpled, dirty, and highlighted in pink marker. A line was circled. Residents are encouraged to remain vigilant. Unstable individuals may attempt to restrict access to our shared spaces. Unstable. Right. I installed floodlights on the front of the barn, linked to motion sensors. I mounted another trail cam on the gate. I added license plate capture to the drive. Anyone who came near my land was getting recorded, documented, and burned into permanent memory. Then came the real gem. A manila envelope arrived by courier. No return address. Inside, printed photos of me. Grainy zoom shots of me walking along the pond, holding a shovel, sitting on the porch with my dog. Even one of me reaching into my mailbox. Someone had been tailing me. That was the moment I stopped thinking this was just about a fence or a pond. This was coordinated, strategic, HOA guerrilla warfare. I handed the whole file over to Rachel, who added harassment and stalking to the growing list of civil complaints. Meanwhile, I kept checking the pond each morning. The water, thankfully, didn't care. It just reflected the sky and held the fish. But I knew better. This wasn't over. The legal battle was next. And it was going to be bloody. The hearing was set for Tuesday morning at the county courthouse in Dahlonega. Rachel told me to wear something respectable but not meek, so I showed up in a clean work shirt, jeans without holes, and my best pair of boots, the ones I usually saved for funerals or livestock auctions. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, and smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and bureaucracy. Karen arrived in a tailored gray suit, like she was applying for a position in a hedge fund. Her lawyer, Whitley, looked bored. Like this was just another hiccup in their playbook of land grabs. The judge, a heavyset man named Waller with a bald crown and zero tolerance for games, called us to order. Rachel laid out our side in 10 crisp minutes. Survey results, historical plat maps, drone footage, timestamps, and the now official forensic report confirming that the forged environmental usage adjustment documents had no legal validity. She emphasized that the fence blocked lawful agricultural activity, that multiple trespasses had been documented, and that my personal safety had been jeopardized by a coordinated misinformation campaign. Then it was Whitley's turn. He stood up with a rehearsed air and spun a tale of communal traditions, of shared use rights, and even had the gall to cite a cultural shift toward collective environmental stewardship. I swear I saw the judge's eyebrow twitch. Then Karen stood up, unprompted, and asked to briefly address the court as a resident. Waller allowed it. Mistake. Karen launched into a monologue about how her community felt unsafe, how I had intimidated peaceful families, and how the spirit of the neighborhood was being poisoned by paranoia. She cited noise complaints, mysterious gunshots at night, and an unverified rumor that I was using water from the pond to run illegal equipment. Rachel didn't even blink. She waited for Karen to finish her descent into theatrical madness, then calmly asked for a court order to freeze all HOA actions regarding my property, pending trial. Judge Waller reviewed the documents again. Then he leaned forward and spoke like he was chewing glass. Mrs. Lawrence, you are not a licensed surveyor, you are not a registered planner, and you are not a party to Mr. Bentley's land deed. What you are is dangerously close to being found in contempt of court. I see no evidence of shared ownership, no viable easement, and frankly, no respect for due process. He paused, glanced at Whitley. This court orders the immediate removal of the fence segment encroaching on Mr. Bentley's property. HOA shall cease any and all administrative or physical activity relating to Parcel 47A. Violation will result in fines of up to $10,000 per instance. We'll see you all again at trial in 30 days. Outside the courtroom, Karen looked like a balloon with a slow leak. Her lips were thin and bloodless, and Whitley was already on the phone, probably calling their PR damage control. But they didn't waste time licking wounds. 2 days later, my phone blew up. A local blog, North Georgia Civil Watch, ran a piece titled Private Pond, Public Lies, The War Over Water in Hickory Crest. It was well-researched, full of court screenshots, quotes from the hearing, and even an aerial shot of the fence line. The real cherry on top? The reporter had uncovered that Karen had attempted a similar community access push in a previous HOA back in Cobb County. That time, she'd tried to turn a private orchard into a shared garden. It failed, but not before she cost that HOA $38,000 in legal fees. The article went mildly viral in our little world. Suddenly, people were talking. Neighbors, journalists, county clerks. I received 3 interview requests. One guy even showed up with a drone asking to film a follow-up piece on rural land rights. I turned him down, but the message was clear. Karen had picked a fight under the wrong spotlight. Then, like clockwork, retaliation came. That weekend, someone dumped a load of yard waste across my main driveway. Not just leaves, concrete chunks, broken lattice, soggy bags of mulch, all blocking the gate. I had to rent a skid steer to clear it. A day later, my mailbox was torched. Literally melted. Sheriff's Department filed it as suspected arson, but unless someone caught them in the act, it would be tough to prove. I had trail cams, but not near the gate, so I added more. Mounted infrared cameras on poles, added floodlights with recording triggers, ran motion sensors near the tree line. I turned my property into a damn fortress. Meanwhile, Rachel updated our lawsuit to include the new incidents as evidence of intimidation tactics and retaliation. The legal motion now spanned 34 pages and named 4 HOA board members directly. Then I got a certified letter from the county. Karen, or someone on her behalf, had submitted a request for immediate environmental audit and compliance review of my farm, alleging that my irrigation system posed a threat to downstream wetlands and that potential contamination from illegal fertilizers needed to be evaluated. It was complete garbage. I used organic certified fertilizer and had runoff control in place for years, but it meant the county had to send someone out. A young inspector named Felix showed up 2 days later. He was polite, embarrassed, and told me off the record that he already knew this was political. He did his inspection, found nothing. "I'll file the report clean," he said, "but brace for more. Someone's trying to wear you down." They were, but they were underestimating how stubborn a man can get when you screw with his land, his name, and his water. By the time the trial date neared, I was running on equal parts caffeine and adrenaline. The cameras had caught 2 more incidents. A man in a gray windbreaker trying to tamper with my irrigation pump at 2 in the morning, and a group of teenagers, probably from Hickory Crest, tossing garbage bags into the pond while filming themselves on a phone. I handed all the footage to Rachel. She compiled it into a clean, time-stamped dossier with cross-referenced camera angles and water quality logs. We weren't just going to court with a case. We were bringing a digital sledgehammer. The trial was scheduled for a Thursday, a full-day session at the Superior Court. This time, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, HOA members, local farmers, and even a few curious college kids with notebooks. Rachel and I sat at the plaintiff's table while Karen strutted in like she was starring in a courtroom drama, Whitley trailing behind her with a laptop and that smug, tired look attorneys wear when they've already lost but can't admit it yet. The judge, Waller again, opened the session by laying out the claims: trespass, defamation, unlawful enforcement of non-existent jurisdiction, attempted regulatory fraud, and personal harassment. HOA's countersuit had been dismissed 2 days earlier due to lack of standing. Karen's attempt to sue me for denial of public access was laughed out of court when the county registrar confirmed no such public easement ever existed. We started with the land surveys. Our licensed surveyor took the stand and walked the court through every inch of the boundary. He showed the historical parcel maps, the 2010 pond permit in my name, and the updated GIS overlays proving the HOA fence was a full 26 feet over the property line in 3 spots. When asked under oath if there was any legal ambiguity, he simply said, "None. The pond belongs entirely to Mr. Bentley." Then came the digital evidence. Rachel rolled out everything: the drone footage, the security cam clips, the voice recordings, even the audio of Karen threatening to escalate this to the county until he's buried in paperwork. The court clerk stopped typing during that one. Karen's defense was a disaster. She tried to interrupt twice and was warned. Her lawyer tried to introduce an environmental stewardship resolution as justification for their actions. Turns out it wasn't a county policy, but a self-written document adopted by the HOA board. Judge Waller asked one question: "Did you ever file this with the county zoning office?" The answer was no. It was tossed out immediately. Then came the bombshell. Under cross-examination, Karen was asked if she had ever attempted similar land claims in other neighborhoods. She denied it, calmly, almost too calmly. That's when Rachel dropped the file. An official deposition from a failed HOA expansion in Cobb County 8 years ago. Same name, same tactics. Karen had led an effort to annex a community orchard for public use under fake environmental zoning claims. That HOA was fined and nearly dissolved. Rachel let the silence do the talking. Karen visibly paled. Her lawyer shifted in his seat. Finally, I took the stand. I spoke plainly about my work as a hydrological engineer, about buying this land 15 years ago, about cleaning that pond with my bare hands and spending thousands maintaining its ecosystem. I talked about the fear I felt when the police detained me on my own boat and the rage of seeing my name slandered in community newsletters. And then I pointed to Karen and said, "This woman tried to rewrite property lines with a printer and a smile." The courtroom was still. Judge Waller recessed for an hour. When he returned, he didn't waste time. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Marshall Bentley. The actions of the Hickory Crest HOA, specifically those led or directed by President Karen Lawrence, constitute illegal trespass, fraudulent misrepresentation, and defamation of character. The court awards damages in the amount of $225,000 for material and reputational harm and orders the immediate removal of all HOA signage, fencing, or claims associated with Parcel 47A. Further, the matter of forged documentation will be referred to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. I heard a gasp, maybe from Karen, maybe from Whitley, maybe from one of the HOA members who finally realized they'd been sold a polished lie. Karen tried to speak. Waller banged the gavel. "We're done here." Outside the courthouse, a reporter shoved a mic in my face. I ignored it. Rachel smiled. "I just wanted to get back home, walk down to the pond and sit there in peace, for the first time in months, knowing the water was mine, by law and by blood, and no HOA president with a God complex was going to take that away." In the days after the verdict, I expected quiet. What I got was chaos. News of the court ruling had spread fast, especially the bit about potential criminal charges. Local blogs ran with headlines like "HOA Queen Faces Legal Reckoning" and "Pond Wars End in Six-Figure Beatdown." Even the regional news channel aired a 2-minute segment showing drone footage of the illegal fence being removed by contractors in yellow vests. I didn't ask them to come out, but I didn't tell them to leave either. Karen vanished. Not literally. She was still holed up in her house at the edge of Hickory Crest, but she stopped appearing at HOA meetings. Rumor had it she was in panic mode, trying to convince the board to fund her personal legal defense. They refused. One member resigned publicly, stating in a Facebook post that Karen had acted without transparency, without consent, and without sanity. A week later, I got the knock I'd been waiting for. 2 plainclothes investigators from the DA's office stood at my door. They had questions. Lots of them. I handed over every file, recording, timestamp, and map we hadn't already given to the court. They seemed especially interested in the doctored land claims Karen submitted to the county, especially the digital signatures, which Rachel's tech expert traced to Karen's home Wi-Fi IP address. That part earned a long whistle from one of the investigators. It didn't take long. The DA moved fast. Karen was arrested on 3 charges: forgery of public records, filing a false police report, and criminal trespass through misrepresentation. She was booked and released on bail the same day, but the mugshot leaked that evening. By morning, it was all over the neighborhood forums. And no, she didn't look pleased. HOA held an emergency meeting without Karen. I wasn't there, but I got the minutes from a neighbor who had grown increasingly apologetic since the verdict. A vote was held, dissolve the current board, initiate a full audit, and formally withdraw all claims related to my land. The motion passed, unanimously. The next day, a few of them came by, not to fight, to apologize. One of the louder residents, a guy named Mitch who'd once told me to stop being selfish with the pond, brought over a peach cobbler and said he was sorry. His voice cracked when he admitted he'd trusted Karen too much. I didn't have it in me to gloat. I just nodded and said, "Next time, ask before you build a fence on someone else's land." I could feel the tension dissolving, slowly, quietly, like storm clouds retreating from an overworked sky. It had rained the night before, a soft, steady drizzle that left the grass heavy and the sky clean. I stood by the edge of the pond, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, and looked out over the still water. No folding chairs, no chattering strangers, no HOA patrols loitering near the fence line, because there was no fence anymore. Just my pond, my land, and the reflection of autumn leaves rippling across the surface. 3 weeks had passed since Karen's arrest. Her charges were still pending, but the DA's office had released a preliminary statement. Evidence strongly supports the prosecution of criminal intent to defraud and misrepresent public records. Not exactly bedtime reading, but it was enough to convince the remaining few defenders in Hickory Crest to let go of their illusions. The HOA board had formally disbanded. A letter from the county arrived confirming that any future attempts to claim access to my property, especially the pond, would be considered civil trespass. They even added a note acknowledging the mistake in the earlier complaint and thanking me for my cooperation during the investigation. I laughed out loud reading that. First time the government had ever thanked me for anything. I installed new signs along the southern boundary. Private property. No trespassing. Pond is not community land. Simple, clear, polite enough. I even added a phone number to one in case someone got lost and needed help. Not everyone was the enemy. Some people just followed the loudest voice around until that voice got indicted for fraud. Rachel visited once more before heading back to Atlanta. She brought me a book on Georgia land rights and a bottle of bourbon for next time, she said. Though hopefully there won't be a next time. I toasted to that and promised to leave the paperwork scanning to her if I ever needed to go to war again. Most evenings I found myself drawn back to the pond. I'd cast a line into the water and let the quiet settle in. Not out of nostalgia, but as a kind of reclaiming. This place had been mine for over 15 years, but now it felt like mine in a way it never had before. Fought for, defended, proven. Sometimes I'd see one of the Hickory Crest folks pass by on the far trail. We'd nod. Nothing more. No awkward words, no apologies. Just an understanding. The boundary had been tested, and it held. The last time I walked the perimeter, I paused beneath the tall hickory that stood halfway between the barn and the pond. The sun was setting behind it, turning the water into a copper mirror. I thought about fences, real and imagined. I thought about how easy it was for someone to decide that what's yours ought to be theirs, and how much work it takes to prove otherwise. Then I smiled, shook my head, and went back to my porch. The crickets were already tuning up for the night, and I had a fresh line to cast in the morning.